Hi everybody, welcome to class. This is Professor Mead, your reluctant YouTube professor. Today we're going to be covering the introduction to the research methods workbook and talk a little bit about how to do the workbook as well. So the process of research and learning statistical analysis, research methods, SPSS, is a process that's quite daunting to most people. And in this class, we're going to cover not only the basic concepts of research, but also the methods, SPSS. You're going to get an introduction. But we're going to do it in a way where you're never being left to figure out anything on your own. I'm going to walk you through everything step by step. Let's start with the term research. It's kind of a problematic term because we hear it often in our everyday lives, and people will say, I've done research on a topic, I know a lot about it, but what they're talking about and what they mean is that they've Googled it or they've watched a lot of videos. For the scientific community, that would not be considered research. When a scientist says they've done research on a topic, it means that they've followed the scientific method or the series of steps, and then very carefully outlined and kept detailed notes on each step, and then resulting in a research paper. Occasionally, you'll also hear a scientist or researcher say that they're doing research on a topic, but they're actually talking about doing the literature review, which is one component of doing research. And what that means, and the reason why you see that is because often we use research as kind of a slang or a catch-all for also doing the literature review. So this is the scientific method. There are 9 steps. Define the problem, review the literature, create the hypothesis, design the research and sampling methods, develop the test instruments, collect your data, going out into the field and collecting your data, analyzing and interpreting results, writing a paper and presenting your research, and then we repeat. So it might be you that repeats or continues on with the research, or someone else. So one of the key elements of being able to do research is to leave enough detailed information so that somebody could replicate your research project in the future to see if it's valid. And so we do this for a variety of reasons. One is the one I just explained to you so that people could replicate research. Also because we always intend on practicing what we call value-free or unbiased research. We don't set out to do research with an agenda to prove our own point or answer a question in a certain way. You can ask a question, but you should be open to any answer that might be out there. So at this point, I ask you if you can list the steps in the scientific method. If you're not following along in your workbook, take a moment to pull your workbook up on your computer. And what you want to do is click on to the center of each one of these and go ahead and fill in the answers. Try to do it from memory first and only add them in after you know that you haven't remembered that particular one. So what we're doing is we're practicing at making the memory of the steps or the information that we're learning kind of easy to recall for ourselves. In the classroom, we often will, only hear the teacher talking, but when you can listen to something, you only remember about 20% of what you hear, but you remember about 70% of what you hear and you say and you do. So every time we say something out loud or we do an activity, we're more likely to actually cement that information into our brain, which is why I would ask you to do something as simple as just filling in the scientific method steps. So the first task that we need to work on really is deciding on a research topic and writing our research question. So this is your first section within your workbook. And you'll notice as you scroll down into your workbook, we start to go through a series of questions. And this will help guide you into a workable, tentative research question. So don't try to skip to the end without doing it. There's a process for a reason, so it allows us to think through clearly, to create a real research problem, something that is actually a social problem, that's a question that's appropriate for sociology. So through these series of questions, you're going to be able to figure out what you're interested in. So at the beginning of each section, you'll notice that I'm going to let you know where we are in the process, and we will make our way through this entire process one step at a time by the time we finish this class, which is really nice to see how we kind of make it through the entire process of research, and we feel very happy with ourselves when we're finished. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is to start brainstorming. You start your brainstorming session. You can consider any type of general subject area that you might be interested in: race, class, gender, like economic issues, those kinds of things, right? Sexuality, religion, music, media. So start there. That's a nice broad category. And then you want to take it down and narrow it a bit into your subject of interest. And so think about the relationship between maybe one of these general subject areas and an institution or a group or a role that has relationships within those institutions. So you'll notice there's a text box below each one of these questions in your workbook. If your workbook, which is a Word document, shifts around as you're typing, don't be concerned about it. Don't spend any time trying to re-edit it. This is your practice and it's literally your place to brainstorm, to practice, to get your ideas on paper, and it's your working process. And I grade it as such. I don't grade it as a final product. I grade it as your practicing at or your process of working through these ideas, which is really important when we do research. I'm going to then give you a couple yes or no questions. These are typically places where most of us go awry when we're trying to come up with a research question, especially for sociology. Often we might want to come up with an overly individualistic question or a psychological question. And if you are doing a sociology or business or public policy type of class or research, then an overly psychological question is not appropriate. So we're not looking for why are individuals depressed, right? We shouldn't be talking about individuals. We should be talking about groups or institutions or social structures. We shouldn't be asking psychological, but more social structural questions. And you also want to avoid some overly economic questions. If you're counting cogs, if there's no complexity to your social problem, then you want to rethink that. And you also want to avoid any questions that could be answered yes or no. And a great way to identify this is simply to ask someone else. The more that you can talk to someone else about your questions and your answers, the better off you are. Question number 4, can you actually do research on this? So usually when we start doing research or we're thinking about an idea, we're very grandiose in our first attempt at an idea. So now that you have your idea, and it's probably a pretty large idea that you wouldn't be able to manage on your own, you want to bring this down to scale. So if you're actually going to try to do research on this within a 4-month period of time, what you want to do is bring it down to a smaller scale. You're not going to be able to do research on the entire United States or all women in the United States or all minorities in California. So think into a smaller group, right? If you're interested in race, that's great, but think a racial group within one institution in a smaller scale, like a smaller community scale. And then do you have access to that type of information? A lot of times what happens is we are very interested in a topic, but not all of us have access to the same type of people, information, that kind of thing, right? So if I'm interested in immigrant farm workers, It doesn't matter how much of a literature review I do or how much information I can gather online. If I don't have access to immigrant farm workers, I'm not going to be able to do direct research with them. So do you have access to the group that you're interested in? And if you do, in what way? If you don't, how? And what's your budget? Obviously, for most of us, it's zero, but sometimes, maybe you're willing to spend $10 or so on candy so that people will take your survey. So this is the serious owl. When we see the serious owl, what that means is that we've kind of come to the more serious part, and this is kind of the more graded finale part of your paper. So take it pretty seriously, or your workbook. So here I had asked you to write your research question. So this is your place to write your tentative research question, and then to kind of start to make those final editing decisions. So then once you do that, you're going to come to what I've titled your assignment instructions and rubric, and it's the tentative question part of it. So your workbook is your practice at research. It's the process of, right? It's you in process of doing work. So you're graded on it in that capacity. The assignment is your final draft of that. So this one should be a little more polished. You should have your final draft of your research question. You should, think about editing and spelling and that kind of stuff. So I had asked you here to submit your assignment on a separate Word document. That's very important. Make sure it's Word, make sure it's separate. And we're going to start to learn ASA, which is the American Sociological Association Rules and Guidelines for Submitting Sociological Research. And so this is really important to when you're writing papers and turning them in. There's kind of a standard level or expectation of how you would format something and how you would write. My favorite website for this is Purdue, EDU. I don't know how many teachers had me buy like a book, and I never looked it up. I never looked at anything, but I love Purdue because you can just go online, ask your question in Google, and then type Purdue at the end, and it'll pop up exactly what you're looking for. So it's a great little way to ask questions about formatting. And I want you to put your research question in a first level header. So for ASA, this is a first level header. It's going to be left aligned, all caps, not bold, and you're going to have it at the top of your paper as your title. We don't use things like introduction, that kind of thing at the top of our paper. The next two questions are to explain your sociological topics and social structures and why you think your research topic and research question is a social problem. Do both of these in no more than one paragraph each, and put them underneath your title on that same page. And everything should be Times New Roman 12-point font, double space. That's the expectation. You can also find that format guideline in the syllabus. Once you've done all of that, the last thing that you need to do is just to check to make sure that you've done everything correctly. This is actually the rubric that I'm going to use to grade you. So turned in prior to deadline. So it is 1 letter grade per day late or any portion thereof. You use the required format, the one I just told you, and it's located in the syllabus. You have a research question. You worked through the process. It is actually a social problem, and it is, you have made some connections between sociological topics or social structures.